Ho-A Karen. Accused me of theft. But the law was on my side. You won't believe what happened next. Life in the neighborhood had always been fairly uneventful, which was exactly how most of us liked it. It was one of those cookie-cutter suburban communities where lawns were trimmed with military precision, mailboxes matched, and streetlights flickered on like clockwork every evening. Families waved politely while walking their dogs, kids zipped around on bikes, and the most exciting thing to happen on a weekend was a community yard sale or a slightly rowdy barbecue. Everything functioned smoothly under the watchful eye of our local homeowners association, or so it seemed. I'd lived there for over 5 years, quietly blending into the rhythm of neighborhood life. I paid my dues on time, kept my yard clean, and followed the bylaws. Honestly, I had barely any interaction with the HOA board, and that suited me just fine. Most people in the neighborhood, myself included, went out of their way to avoid drama. No one wanted to stir the pot, but every neighborhood has that one person, the self-appointed enforcer, the person who thinks the HOA rules are a personal mission rather than a general guideline. In our case, that person was Karen. Now, I don't throw around the term Karen lightly, but if ever there were someone who truly earned the title, it was her. She wasn't just a stickler for rules, she believed she was the rules. She took it upon herself to patrol the community, keeping an eye out for anything that might be a violation. Left your garbage bins out 15 minutes past collection time, expect a picture in the community group, used a slightly brighter shade of mulch than the one approved in the HOA guidelines. She'd be on your porch with a printed-out complaint form. Still, most people just tolerated her. It was easier to let her play police than to engage in an argument that would go nowhere. Even though she wasn't technically on the HOA board, she practically ran it through sheer force of will and passive-aggressive emails. Up to this point, I had largely flown under her radar. I kept my property clean, didn't throw wild parties, and didn't invite the wrath of HOA watchdogs. Occasionally, I'd receive a weirdly worded newsletter or a petty comment about the color of my seasonal wreath, but nothing serious. It was all just background noise. Annoying, yes, but harmless. I always believed that as long as you didn't give her a reason to come after you, she wouldn't. Turns out, I was wrong. Looking back, there wasn't anything unusual about the day it started. It was a regular Tuesday. I had just gotten home from work, grabbed the mail, and gone inside. No strange packages, no notes, no angry neighbors, just the usual daily routine. At that point, there wasn't even a hint that something was brewing. But while I was minding my own business, Karen was cooking up a storm that would soon pull me right into the middle of it. Unbeknownst to me, a package had gone missing from someone's front porch a few houses down. It happens, especially during holiday seasons or big sale weekends. Sometimes it's a simple delivery error. Other times, porch pirates are to blame. Either way, it wasn't something anyone had come to me about, but somehow, my name had come up. I wasn't told this directly, of course. Karen doesn't do confrontation like a normal person. She spreads accusations like fertilizer, quietly, but with the intent to watch them grow and take root. Before long, there were whispers, strange looks from neighbors, a shift in the way people waved or didn't. You can feel it when something changes, even if no one says it to your face. I started to piece it together when I overheard 2 neighbors chatting outside. One of them said something like, "Well, I heard someone might have taken it," with a glance in my direction. That was the first moment I realized something was off. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just gossip or a misunderstanding. But it didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. The full weight of it didn't hit me until a week later, when I received a notice from the HOA, delivered not by mail or email, but by hand. And of course, it was Karen who made the drop-off. She didn't speak when she handed it to me. Just a smug little smile, like she'd caught me in some criminal act and was about to watch me squirm. I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal request for clarification regarding a possible involvement in the unauthorized removal of property. They weren't using the word theft yet, but the message was clear. Someone had pointed the finger, and that someone was very obviously her. And just like that, life in the neighborhood changed. The peaceful, routine days were over. Karen had drawn the first line, and she had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong person. The notice from the HOA was the tipping point. Up until then, I had assumed that the odd glances, the change in tone from neighbors, and the strange undercurrent in the community were just temporary. But the moment I read the phrasing in that letter, possible involvement in the unauthorized removal of property, I knew that Karen had gone beyond her usual passive-aggressive antics. She was now making formal accusations, and for some reason I was her target. Apparently, a neighbor's package had gone missing from their front porch a few days prior. According to the community thread, it had been a small but valuable item, something like electronics or a limited edition collectible. What made it worse was that the package had reportedly been marked as delivered, and a security alert was sent to the homeowner via their phone app. But when they got home, the package wasn't there. That alone wasn't shocking. Packages get lost or stolen all the time. But this time, it wasn't written off as bad luck. This time, someone was blamed. That someone was me. Karen had decided. I was responsible for the missing package. Why? That was still unclear. I had nothing to do with it. I hadn't seen anything suspicious, hadn't been anywhere near the house in question, and definitely hadn't taken anything. But logic was never Karen's strong suit. Control was. She didn't need proof to start rumors. She only needed suspicion. And once that seed was planted, she'd make sure it grew. Her story started taking shape quickly. She told neighbors she had seen something from her window. She said she spotted a figure, someone about my height and build, walking past the porch around the time the package went missing. She didn't outright say it was me, at least not at first. Instead, she let her language do the work. She said things like, "I'm not naming names, but we all know who walks their dog around that time," or, "Some people don't even have cameras installed, which is suspicious in itself, don't you think?" She hinted. She suggested. She gossiped. And the worst part? Some people started to believe her. It didn't help that I kept to myself more than others in the neighborhood. I wasn't unfriendly, just private. That, combined with Karen's vague accusations, made me the perfect target. People didn't want to believe someone from the outside had stolen a package. It was easier to believe it was one of their own, someone nearby, someone convenient, someone quiet enough to accuse without a scene. Soon after the letter arrived, I began hearing about Karen's evidence. She claimed she had seen me walking near the house on the day the package disappeared. She claimed that I had no reason to be there. She even suggested that my trash bin seemed unusually full that week. Yes, that was the level of her investigation. Apparently, the presence of normal household trash was cause for suspicion in her mind. She took it further. She started lobbying the HOA board to take action. She wanted them to issue a formal violation. She wanted a community meeting to discuss theft prevention and residents of concern. At that point, it wasn't about the missing package anymore. It was about painting me as a threat to the neighborhood. She even went door to door to some residents, asking if they'd noticed anything odd about me lately. Some of them politely declined to get involved, but a few, unfortunately, played along. Whether they genuinely believed her or were just afraid to be on her bad side, I'll never know. But the result was the same. Whispers grew louder, stares lasted longer, conversations stopped when I walked by. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. But in Karen's world, facts didn't matter. The story she spun had taken on a life of its own. In her mind, she was the neighborhood protector, defending against an invisible criminal. And in her version of the story, I was the villain. I tried to keep my distance. I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. But Karen wasn't satisfied with passive aggression. She wanted consequences. She wanted to be seen as the hero who rooted out the thief among us. and she was willing to go as far as needed to make that happen. She brought up my name at the next HOA board meeting. She pressed them to issue a warning. She insisted that her observations were enough to justify suspicion. The fact that there was no proof, irrelevant to her. The fact that the house she claimed I passed by was nowhere near my normal walking route, didn't matter. She had a story to tell, and she was sticking to it. When I found out she had personally filed a complaint to the HOA against me, I realized this wasn't going to blow over. She wasn't just stirring up gossip. She was trying to label me as a criminal. And unless I acted, she just might succeed. She didn't know that I had receipts. She didn't know who she was messing with. And most importantly, she didn't know that I wasn't about to take the fall for something I didn't do. Karen's accusations were reckless. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't some clueless neighbor she could intimidate into silence. She assumed I'd roll over or apologize just to make the situation go away. What she didn't know was that I had every move documented, every alibi backed by solid proof, and most importantly, I knew my rights better than she or the HOA ever would. The day she filed the complaint with the HOA, I began gathering everything. Not because I needed to prove my innocence to her, but because I wanted a complete record to shut this nonsense down before it went any further. I'd dealt with petty people before, but the fact that she tried to twist neighborhood policy into a personal attack made this something I couldn't ignore. First, I pulled footage from my home security system. Like most people in the neighborhood, I had cameras installed around the perimeter of my property. But unlike most, mine were connected to a 24/7 cloud-based system with motion-triggered recording and a complete time-stamped archive. I went through the footage for the day she claimed the package had gone missing. The timeline was crystal clear. I hadn't left my property at the time she said I had been lurking near the house. I wasn't even outside. Next, I pulled up my mobile data. Since I worked remotely on that particular day, I had been active on work calls during the exact window she claimed I was walking near the house. Time-stamped call logs, emails, even Slack messages with live timestamps. Everything showed that I was at my desk during the time of the alleged incident. If push came to shove, I could verify my internet activity down to the second. Her "I saw him walking by" claim didn't stand a chance against digital proof. But I didn't stop there. I checked the community's bylaws and HOA regulations, which I kept copies of, because I believe in knowing the rules I'm expected to follow. I knew from prior disputes with the board that hearsay and unverified personal accounts were not valid grounds for formal complaints. Any accusation of theft or property damage required either police involvement or hard evidence before any board action could be taken. Karen's report had neither. No footage, no proof, just her word and her flair for drama. In fact, I found out that the HOA's own guidelines clearly stated that accusations of criminal behavior must be referred directly to local law enforcement. The board itself wasn't legally allowed to pursue or enforce accusations of theft without police documentation. That one rule alone meant her complaint was already invalid. I also discovered something interesting while reviewing the HOA's code enforcement process. Anyone who knowingly files a false or misleading complaint can face penalties, including fines and even temporary suspension from attending board meetings. That meant Karen's little stunt wasn't just annoying, it was actionable. To top it off, I reached out to a lawyer friend of mine. He specialized in property law and had dealt with HOA cases many times before. I sent him copies of everything: Karen's complaint, my security footage, the board's letter, the community regulations. He reviewed everything and confirmed exactly what I suspected. Not only was her complaint baseless, but if she or the board continued to harass me without evidence, I could file a counter-complaint for defamation and harassment. Karen had no idea. I had all of this locked and loaded. She thought she was dealing with someone who would get scared at the word theft. But legally, she had nothing on me. I was airtight. Every single piece of evidence supported my side. I had time-stamped footage, digital records, written bylaws, and legal backup. If she wanted to go to war over a package I had nothing to do with, she was going to lose. Badly. The beauty of it all was that I never had to raise my voice or make any dramatic declarations. I didn't need to match her level of hysteria. I just needed to follow the facts. The law was already on my side. She thought she was being clever, trying to weaponize neighborhood gossip, but what she failed to understand was that in the eyes of the law, and even in the fine print of her precious HOA handbook, none of her accusations held weight. All her whispers, her gossip, her little campaign to turn neighbors against me, it was built on air. And the moment real evidence entered the room, her whole story would collapse. Karen wasn't used to being challenged. She thrived in spaces where no one pushed back, where intimidation worked, where she could control the narrative. But I wasn't. Afraid of her, and I didn't need to shout to defend myself. I had truth, documentation, and the legal upper hand. She accused the wrong person this time. Because I wasn't just innocent. I was legally untouchable. The confrontation didn't come with any warnings. It wasn't a planned event or some dramatic showdown on a public stage. It unfolded naturally, as things like this often do when pressure builds past the point of containment. Karen had been stoking the fire for weeks, pushing her accusations further, rallying a handful of neighbors, and trying to pressure the HOA board into taking more serious action. But she had no idea how far I was prepared to go to stop the nonsense. When the HOA finally scheduled an official meeting to address community concerns, I knew it was going to be about me. The phrasing was vague, but the subtext was obvious. Karen had managed to frame this as a neighborhood safety issue, and the board, tired of her constant pestering, had agreed to hear it out. She showed up with a manila folder in hand, clearly, expecting to deliver some kind of grand reveal. What she didn't expect was that I came prepared, too. As she began speaking, she leaned into her usual performance, calm on the surface but laced with veiled accusations. She claimed she had witnessed concerning behavior, referred to a pattern of suspicious activity, and insisted that the neighborhood needed to take theft more seriously. She danced around using my name, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. Her smirks, her gestures, her careful use of words, all of it pointed straight at me, but the minute she paused and the board opened the floor for discussion, I stepped in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I simply asked if I could share my side, and when granted the floor, I laid it all out, calmly, methodically, and without hesitation. First came the security footage. I provided copies for the board and read out the exact timestamps showing that I never left my house during the time the package supposedly went missing. The cameras covered the entire front of my property, showing clearly that I had not been anywhere near the street Karen claimed I had walked down. Then came the digital logs, my call history, emails, and even screen captures from work chats showing that I was online and active during the alleged time frame. The room grew quiet. Karen's expression began to change. She still tried to interrupt, throwing in lines like, "I never said it was definitely him," or "I was just raising awareness." But the damage to her credibility was already unfolding. I reminded the board that the HOA bylaws required verifiable evidence for any criminal accusation, and that this had been an entirely one-sided campaign built on assumptions and hearsay. Then I presented her complaint letter, the one she filed with the board, which I had obtained a copy of. In it, she clearly implied that I had stolen the package. I pointed to the section of the HOA rules that prohibited false or misleading accusations, including provisions for fines and potential disciplinary action. Her face went pale. Finally, I shared the email I had received from my lawyer, who had reviewed everything and confirmed that if this harassment continued, I had grounds for a defamation case. The room was completely silent at that point. The board members looked uncomfortable. A few neighbors looked stunned. and Karen had lost the smug confidence she'd walked in with. Someone on the board cleared their throat and asked if Karen had any proof to support her claims. She stammered, insisting that she thought she saw something and that she was just trying to be vigilant. But the vague language didn't help her anymore. She had made it clear for weeks that she was targeting me, and now, faced with hard evidence, she had nothing to stand on. A board member eventually thanked me for presenting my side and said the HOA would not be pursuing any action based on Karen's claims. They also added, gently but firmly, that moving forward, all residents should avoid making accusations without solid evidence. It was a diplomatic way of saying, "Karen, sit down." As the meeting wrapped up, a few neighbors even came up to apologize or offer a supportive word. Some admitted they hadn't known the full story. Others simply said they were tired of Karen's constant crusades. The mood had shifted entirely. What started as an attempt to label me a thief ended with Karen being exposed for weaponizing rumors. The confrontation wasn't explosive. There were no screaming matches or thrown papers. But it was effective. The moment she realized her narrative had collapsed under the weight of facts, something in her deflated. She left the meeting without saying another word. She learned that day that not everyone in the neighborhood could be pushed around. She found out that there are limits to what she could get away with, even when she used fear and manipulation. And most importantly, she discovered that some people aren't just innocent, they're prepared. The confrontation was over. And for the first time since it all began, the truth had been heard. In the days following the HOA meeting, the atmosphere in the neighborhood began to shift. Where there had once been awkward silences and subtle side-eyes, there were now polite nods, small conversations, and even a few friendly gestures from people who previously kept their distance. The damage Karen had tried to do with her smear campaign had not only failed, but it had backfired completely. People saw her for what she was, not a vigilant protector of the community, but someone who weaponized paranoia and petty gossip. Word spread quickly about how thoroughly I had shut down her accusations. People talked about the security footage, the digital logs, the legal response, all of it. It wasn't about gloating or rubbing it in anyone's face. It was about reclaiming my name, and I had done that in a way that left no room for doubt. The story Karen had tried to tell had collapsed under the weight of facts, and everyone had seen it happen in real time. What surprised me most was the quiet but consistent support that started flowing in. A few neighbors stopped by over the next few days, some just to say hello, and others to apologize for believing even a part of what Karen had suggested. One elderly couple who had been in the community for decades came by with homemade cookies and a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for standing up to the nonsense. We're glad to have you here." That gesture meant more than they probably realized. Another neighbor, someone I hadn't spoken to much before, admitted that Karen had tried to recruit him into her whisper campaign weeks earlier. She had approached him during a walk, casually, bringing up the theft situation and strongly hinting that I was behind it. He told me that he didn't believe her at the time, but he hadn't felt comfortable speaking up. Now, after seeing the truth unfold, he wanted to make it clear that he stood on the side of facts and fairness. As for the HOA, things became noticeably quieter. I received a follow-up letter, not quite an apology, but a formal statement clearing me of any involvement and confirming that no further action would be taken. It was cold and professional, but it did the job. More importantly, it sent a message that unsubstantiated accusations wouldn't be entertained in the future. Karen's credibility had been deeply undermined, and the board, whether they liked it or not, had been forced to recognize the importance of evidence and due process. Karen herself all but disappeared from public view for a while. The woman who had once marched from door to door with faux concern and passive-aggressive charm now avoided eye contact and stuck to her own property. Her influence in the neighborhood waned dramatically. People stopped taking her seriously. Even those who once entertained her gossip now treated her with thinly veiled annoyance. The community had seen her exposed, and while they weren't openly cruel, the social cold shoulder she received said everything. Sweet justice didn't come in the form of revenge. It came in the quiet dismantling of her reputation. It came in the soft-spoken apologies, the cookies, the nods of solidarity, and the loss of her imagined authority. She had tried to isolate and discredit me, but the result was the opposite. Her actions had unified the neighborhood against her. In a twist of irony, the incident sparked something positive. The HOA began revisiting its complaint procedures. Discussions started around clearer guidelines for evidence-based reporting, and there was talk of implementing a neutral third-party mediator for future disputes. The same situation that had once made me a scapegoat was now helping the community build better systems for fairness and accountability. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want the drama, the confrontation, or the sudden attention. But in standing up for myself, I'd managed to set a precedent, one that said facts mattered more than fear, and that no one, not even a longtime resident with a self-appointed authority complex, was above the truth. The sense of peace that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple. It was knowing that I could walk down my street without feeling scrutinized. It was exchanging small talk with people who used to look away. It was hearing laughter instead of tension during block events. The weight that Karen had tried to place on my shoulders was gone, lifted not just by evidence, but by the quiet strength of truth, resilience, and community support. I hadn't just cleared my name. I'd reminded people that silence enables bullies. And by refusing to stay silent, I had helped the entire neighborhood see clearly. That was justice. Not the loud kind, the lasting kind. If you're tired of entitled Karens thinking they own the neighborhood, it's time to fight back with facts and fearlessness. Hit that like button, share the truth, and don't forget to subscribe to Expose HOA Karen.